Today I have the distinct pleasure of preaching the first Sunday of Pride, which is really exciting for me. I actually asked Paul at first if there were any other dates because I had a concert right before this, and he gave me something in July, and I was like, no, never mind, this will work. 'Cause I always wanted to get to preach during Pride Month. But before I get to that, I would like to tell you about my other favorite annual month-long event. Some of you may be familiar with this social media tradition I participate in called No Shame November, which my friend Hope introduced me to. The premise is basically every day for the month of November, you go to your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, whatever, and you post something embarrassing or self-deprecating about yourself. Essentially, you share something every day you'd be ashamed to tell other people. And so to help explain, I've brought some examples of mine from past years, so this is about to get real personal. November 1st, 2015. This morning I woke up to discover the last 2 bites of a ham and Swiss croissant in my bed under the covers. I'm not quite sure how I managed to fall asleep without finishing it last night, but I definitely ate the rest of it this morning. November 12th, 2018. The day I learned the hard way that my chest is too hairy to put a nicotine patch on. November 24th, 2018, I once spent 3 hours trying to figure out why my phone's microphone wouldn't work. Turns out there was a bit of Vaseline in the input. November 17th, 2018, my coworker really hates it when I use sock donations as sock puppets, which is pretty much the only reason I don't play sock puppets at work all the time. November 3rd, 2014. Today in class, our professor introduced the concept of hapax legomena. Every single time she said the word, I whispered under my breath, do. November 29th, 2016. I once made a first date pull over the car because I really needed to pee. I then relieved myself on a nearby Catholic school. Somehow we went out again after that. And finally, I think you'll appreciate this one. November 15th, 2016. I always wear sexy underwear when I'm delivering a sermon. It's all a lot of fun, but it actually has become really meaningful to me over the past couple of years. And I think it's mostly because I have this personal rule that I'll never share anything that I feel like is actually morally wrong. And I've had to think about this a couple times. To me, this is, I recognize that there are things that I should be ashamed of or guilty. There are things that are wrong, and I don't make it a habit to flaunt them. But I want to show that some things you really don't need to be so embarrassed about. The verse from John today influenced my thinking on that a lot. We all seem to have this natural inclination to want to hide from others when we know we've done something wrong. Even a dog, when it's peed on the carpet, will hide in the corner or put its tail between its legs, trying to make itself smaller. And if you recall, Adam and Eve, the first moment they sinned, tried to hide that from God so she wouldn't see them in their nakedness, so we're told. Likewise, as the Bible tells us here, when people know that they have done wrong, they seek to hide in the darkness, while those of us who have done good feel compelled to walk in the light. And not just that. The people who love darkness don't only want to hide themselves. They want all of us to live in darkness. You see, if everyone is in darkness, then no one can tell what is right or wrong, and no one can see their hatred and cruelty for what it is. There's a well-known story in certain Christian cultures about a man named Tony Campolo who was invited to speak in front of a youth gathering. And he began this speech by saying the following: I have 3 things I'd like to say to you today. First, while you were sleeping last night, 30,000 kids died of starvation or diseases related to malnutrition. Second, most of you don't give a shit. What's worse is that you're more upset with the fact that I said shit than the fact that 30,000 kids died last night. I think that's part of what I'm saying here. Many people live in darkness because they've conflated impropriety with immorality. They earnestly have more of a problem with the word shit than the fact that children are starving. And this is a kind of darkness, a way of seeking to obscure what it means to be good and to do right in the world. so that we need not be responsible for this evil being done to our fellow man. I think really that's what shame looks like. It's when those who live in darkness try to block out the light so that we are indistinguishable from them. So for me, No Shame November is this wonderful little tradition in which I name the things I'm supposed to feel bad about, and by doing so, I refuse to. I remove their power simply by saying with dignity, this is who I am. I pick my nose and play with sock puppets, and I'm no stranger to public urination, and I refuse to let you make me feel like a lesser person because of these things. Now, granted, I will say peeing on a Catholic school is by no means classy. I'm not really defending that, I just don't think it's immoral. But I think we do ourselves a disservice when we conflate something like that with acts that actively harm other people. So I make a point of letting my impropriety and bad manners see the light of day, to make the point that we have no need to feel guilt for such things when no harm is done to anyone. To me, this is what pride is about as well. It's a reaction to a world that's continually tried to hide us away, raiding our bars, policing our wardrobes, shoving us in the back of police wagons, refusing to speak our names, relegating some of the most important relationships in our lives to the status of roommates, or at best, special friends, killing us in the streets for daring to express ourselves. People do these things because they are ashamed of themselves, ashamed at the lives that they live, ignoring those in need, shunning those who are different, and moving about this world with hate in their hearts. But they cannot bring themselves to admit that, so they seek to shove us in the closet. They legislate our rights, and they ask us not to be ourselves in public, so that the light of day doesn't reveal that our lives are beautiful, and their stubborn refusal to see it is ugly. Pride is an unequivocal declaration that no matter what kind of shame the world will try to pin on us, we will not let it stick, because we don't believe you when you say it's wrong. This love cannot be wrong. It is the most beautiful thing I have seen. I have tasted the fruit and found nothing rotten, so you won't make me feel bad or like I need to hide in the darkness. We prove this to them every time we march around town in broad daylight. And what's beautiful about that is, when you have nothing to hide, then it feels natural to walk as an out person in the sunlight on a cloudless day in front of a bunch of screaming crowds, and if you're in me, in 4-inch heels. We have a wisdom in our hearts that tells us that this is right and good, and we have tasted and seen it. Similarly, for all their power and all their superiority complex, our detractors tend to have a natural inclination to darkness at times. They wait until it is late at night and the streets are empty to attack us. They scream slurs and drive off so they don't have to look at us, and they hide themselves behind euphemism and excuse. Whatever may be said about any topic, there's a litmus test here. If people are unafraid to have their deeds known, their deeds are generally good. If they feel the need to keep things secret, there's probably some wrongdoing or, centuries of your culture telling you to feel bad about something you shouldn't. There's a fuzzy line. It's not a perfect science. Now, I'll grant, as I said, it's not a perfect system. There are individuals who revel in revealing their ill deeds to the world, and some, myself included, who just don't like attention. I realize that's ironic because I'm standing in front of you doing this right now. I think it's a useful tool, though, to think on the morality of any action by considering whether or not it's something I feel comfortable marching down the street telling throngs of strangers. And what's great about our community is that we also know what it is like to free ourselves from the shame of living in darkness, from feeling guilty and exposed. We know that that's an incredible lightness. We discover that we can breathe more easily living out in the open than we ever did hiding ourselves in darkness. In fact, what is unique about us among these people of the light is that we know the darkness almost better than any of them. So many of us have felt the need to hide ourselves in it, allowing the hateful and spiteful to draw us into their shame. We are people who have lived that and now live life in the light, and we can appreciate just how powerful the difference between the two is. We know which is the better way to live. And the funny thing, too, when you look at this use this lens to look at the world, a lot of other things suddenly add up in a new way. Because it's not only in matters of queer rights and liberation that the people of the light and those who dwell in darkness are at odds with each other. The people who love the dark also like to cast confusion and obfuscation on topics across the spectrum. You may have heard recently that the U.S. Energy Department has relabeled fossil fuels as freedom gas. Or you may recall the Patriot Act, a staggering loss of American freedoms passed because who's going to stand against patriotism? Or you can consider that when a black athlete knelt in respect to recognize the murders of unarmed black men in this country, it got changed to a conversation about disrespecting the troops. The examples of this are endless. There's a rebranding that is nothing less than the very same shame impulse attempting to use the confusion of the darkness to make themselves out to be the righteous ones, and giving them a convenient opportunity to manipulate us into becoming complacent with their evil deeds. But this does not work on people who live in the light. We see clearly what they think is hidden by darkness. So we go on working for the freedom and our dignity of our fellow people, but we will always be hindered by those unable to see rightly because they are still living in this darkness. It's a small wonder then that we see so many calls today for civility. Civility sounds very nice. It's a good principle to keep, but the way it is used in our culture means you can't speak unpleasantly ever. If things are unpleasant, don't point that out. Either we'll find another phrase to soften the blow, or we just won't talk about it. Civility is an easy way to keep people in the dark because, like all such things, it's a pleasant word for an ugly ideal. With good lighting, you can see through it clear as day. In the dark, it is harder to tell, so it is much easier for them to make us look awful because we're talking about ugly things. They make pointing ugly things out to be a crime. So, at the end of the day, what do we do with this? I'm really the last person who ever takes it easy on the congregation when I tell you how you're supposed to respond to stuff, but it's kind of the truth this week. Do what you've always done. We walk in the light, head held high, so the world knows that we have nothing to be ashamed of. And when they see this, and they see that we are good people, then maybe a sliver of light shines on them, and maybe it grows. It already has for so many of us. Where would any of us be if no one had been there to shed that light on us, to show us the truth that we are beautiful and have nothing to hide? Where would we be without those of us across the centuries who brought themselves out of a much greater darkness than we know now? That's the way light spreads, little by little, like the first touch of dawn, brought forth by all of us who are not afraid to walk out in the open with no shame and be seen by the world.